Maybe I'm switching to chemistry or something like that, and this is lab. Sounds fairly ominous. Okay, so what you might not have seen, okay, we saw that equality, we can do testing for equality or inequality. What you might not have seen is we can test to see if one string is larger or greater than the other. So we can actually test to see if the letter lowercase r is greater than b, and in fact that's true, okay? And you might say, well, that seems a little weird, but then you say, well, maybe it's looking at it in sort of where it appears in the alphabet, which it is, and so since r occurs later in the alphabet than b, then it says, yeah, that's greater than. And, okay, that's good. But now if we do a test of capital B, is that greater than lowercase b? And the answer is it isn't. That will return a false. So if I were to go into, let's just, so in fact, uppercase B is not greater than lowercase b. It's a less than. You might think that capitals are larger, certainly in terms of their size on the page are larger. So why is it that when it does this comparison, it doesn't do what we would intuitively think? So the answer is that characters in the computer are represented by this code called ASCII. I might have mentioned this before. You might have heard this in prior classes. And all ASCII is an association between a character as we know it and a number. Because we know that computers only deal with numbers, right? Inside a computer, the only thing that the circuitry in a computer can do is to do things with numbers. But we as human beings like alphabetic characters. And so how does the computer accommodate our need for having characters with its need for only dealing with numbers? And the answer is that the computer industry has set up this association with a number and a character. And that association of a number and a character is known by these 5 letters, ASCII, which is pronounced ASCII. And all it is, it's really quite simple. It simply says here, guys, if you can see it in the back, that the letter capital A is associated with the number 65. So every computer manufacturer in the world, whether they're making a monitor, a printer, a phone, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever. Everybody who does anything with computers has adopted this ASCII code, and they know that if they wanted to, let's say, print on the screen a capital A, they would send out to the device a 65, and they know that the 65 will then display a capital A on the screen. Okay? It really, this is just a convention that the computer industry has come up with because, again, inside the computer, we can only really deal with numbers. We can translate at some point in time if someone types in an A on the keyboard. The keyboard actually, inside the keyboard, is electronics that says, oh, this person typed in a capital A, I'm sending to the computer a 65. Sending the rest of the computer system to 65. So somebody has to do the translation. Some component has to do translation. But once that is done, the rest of the system is dealing with numbers. And we'll see here that a capital B is a 66 and a lowercase b is a 98. So it should come as no surprise now that you see that a capital B is a 66 and a lowercase b is a 98, that if in fact when I compare capital B to see if it's greater than B, what I'm really doing is I'm comparing not the B, but I'm comparing a 66 to a 98. And since 66 obviously isn't greater than 98, it says it's not greater than. And that's all there is to it. There's not that big a deal. And and you can even compare strings. So I was just doing one string. I was just doing a comparison of one character to another. But here, if I was to see if is Jaguar, I'll pronounce it the proper way, as opposed to, is that right? You pronounce it Jaguar or Jaguar? Either? Which? Okay, Jaguar. And who's? Oh, Luke's not here. He would correct us. He's British, so he would have told us. Jaguar. We'll pronounce it Jaguar since he's not here. Jaguar, is that less than Python? Well, it is. Why is it less than Python? Well, it's because when it's doing the comparison, what it does is it does a character by character comparison, left to right. So it says, okay, I'm taking the first character from Jaguar and comparing it to the P in Python. Is J less than P? Yes. Ball game's over. Then it's true. In the comparison of Jaguar to Jaguar, well, J, we have two J's. Okay, so now what do? Well, then we take the next character, we take the second character in each string, we take an A, and is that less to Java? Well, they're the same, and then we're going to compare the third character, a G, is that less than V? It is, and so therefore it's true. And obviously, when we're doing upper and lower case, it's hard to see here. Here I have blank. Well, it doesn't make any difference. Here, I'm doing Dave against Dave, but this. So Dave, we saw lowercase letters are greater than uppercase letters, and therefore this can't be. It's going to be false. Dave is not less than Dave. I have a blank here, but I have a blank in both, so it doesn't really make any difference. And of course, if I were to do an equality comparison, they're not the same, again, because they have different ASCII values. Now, there are two functions you guys should know, I think really simple functions, that let us deal with individual characters in doing this translation. So suppose, for whatever reason, we in our program want to get a particular character and find out what its ASCII value is. Obviously you can't look it up in the table. Is there some way, some function that will return for me what the numeric value is for a particular character? And that function is called ORD, O-R-D. And so ORD takes as a parameter a character, and it returns the ASCII value of that character. So if you say ORD double quote A double quote close parentheses, it returns a 65 because in the ASCII table A is associated with a 65. If I were to ask ORD to give me the value of a lowercase a, well, it knows the difference between upper and lowercase, and it's going to go to the same ASCII table and tell me that a lowercase a is associated with a 97. Now note here, everybody, and you should be painfully aware of this, that a space is a character. As legal and as important a character as a capital A or any other character in the character set. And it too has a numeric value. The value for a space is 32. I don't know if I have it. Oh, there you go. So here on this slide here, you'll see the symbol is blank, and that's equal to a 32. So ORD will return the value of any character, okay? And I can take that number depending upon what I want to do, and I can use ORD to return to me the ASCII value of a particular character. Okay? A very simple function. Suppose we had the opposite problem. Suppose somebody gave us a number, an ASCII number, and said, okay, display the character associated with that ASCII number. And so there's a second function called CHR. And the CHR function will take a number, right? ORD took a letter and returned a number. CHR takes a number and returns a letter. So if I say CHR 65, it goes in the ASCII table, now not going down the symbols, it's going into the number, and it says, oh, 65, that's an A, and 97 is a lowercase a. So the two functions are ORD and CHR, and they're fairly straightforward in terms of how they work. Okay, so those are two other functions you can add to your toolkit in dealing with individual characters within a string. Okay, we're going to learn now two methods in dealing with strings that are quite useful. I think one's quite useful, the other one marginally. And that's the split method and the join method, two different methods. The split method takes a string and breaks it up into substrings. Okay, so I've got a big long string that I want to break apart, and the split method does that for me. I'll show you specifically what that does. And then the join method will take a list that has in it strings and combine it together into one string. So split takes a string and returns a list. Join takes a list and returns a string. So they're sort of, they're go together in terms of one goes one way from, a split goes from taking a list, taking a string and forming a list, and join takes a list and constructs a string. When you see it, you'll see it's fairly straightforward. So here's an example of the split method. So, let me do it here, maybe it's easier to see. So suppose I have a string that's equal to A, comma, B, comma, C, comma. That's what string is. And let's suppose I want to break it apart. Hold on, let me give you a different one. I'm taking string is now equal to A space. I'm instead of having a comma separating them, I'm having a space. So if I say string dot split, and since it's a method, I have to put in open and close parentheses. Notice what gets returned is a list, and the list consists of three elements, the A, the B, and the C. So the split method takes a string. In this particular case, the components of the string are separated by spaces, and returns a list where each one of the elements of the string are a separate element in the list. And I could have had so here I have a different string, each three components separated by a space, and if I do string dot split, notice that it returns the three substrings in string, and it returns each component that was separated by a space as a component in the list. And it could have been irregular. Here you saw I had a different number of C's, but you could have had A, and the spaces are irrelevant, B, 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 and then two C's. So it doesn't care. It's simply going to look for the space separating the different components and then break it up into three components because it saw, based upon the spaces, that there were three components. So that's what split does. Fairly straightforward. By default, the split method will, when it's looking at a string, will separate based upon what's called white space. So white space is a blank, or it could be a tab character. So if I were to say, remember the string, remember we have, remember the \t is a tab character. So if I were to have that, okay, and notice that the \tab character is embedded. If I were to say string.split, it again will treat that \t, which is the tab character, as space, and then it's going to then use that in this particular case instead of the space to actually break the string apart. And I think even so here I'm using both spaces and the tab character, and it shouldn't matter. It doesn't really differentiate between a blank or the tab. It treats both of those as white space and then simply extracts out the components. Everybody get it? You can't, so suppose now I have a string that says that's equal to AA, comma, what I started with, B, comma, C, 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 C. Well, now it's not a space that's separating them, it's a comma, and in fact, when I do split on it, it doesn't break it up into three different segments, it creates one list element, effectively the string. But that's not what I wanted. I wanted it to break it up. The only difference here now is my separated character is a comma and not white space. So what you can do with the split method is you can tell it, hey, guess what? It's not white space. That's the character that splits it out. And now you can tell it what character is used to partition the different segments of the string. And so here, in double quotes, I put in a comma. That's telling split, don't look for a space or tab. Look for a comma. And now if I tell it to do that, now notice that I get three elements in the list, A, B, and C, C, C. And not the one element, just the whole, when I did the whole string, when I called split and didn't pass it the separator character. So, and the split character here, my example here, so if you had A star star B star star C and you did split and what you're looking for, it doesn't even have to be one character. It can be multiple characters. If it's two characters here, it's going to treat that as the thing that splits them. And so it says, okay, fine, I got an A followed by two stars. That's the first element. A B followed by two stars. It's the second element. And a C, and there's nothing at the end, but it always gets to return the third character. So oftentimes when you're dealing with strings, it's nice to be able to break them apart based upon some character, and the split does a terrific job of that for you. The join is the opposite of the split. So join, suppose we have a list, to be or not to be, where I have 6 elements in the list. And what I want to do is I want to create a string that are composed of these elements. And so what I do is, okay, this looks a little funny, guys, so let's take a look at it. So line here are the 6 elements, the 6-element list that has the 6 substrings. And I want to join them together to be one whole string. Well, I'm going to call the join method, and I'm going to pass with this list line. What's this first parameter that I'm passing to join? What's this double quote space double quote? The double quote space double quote is the character that you want joined to separate the elements of the list. In this case, it's a blank. If I were to say superheroes, and I had Superman, Batman, Spider-Woman, and Wonder Woman, and here I have double quote, comma, double quote, dot, join superheroes. Now you see, note that when it created to be or not to be, it separated each of the words by a space. Now what it's doing is it's separating each of the words in the list by a comma, because that's what was the first value that I passed to the join method. So the join method allows us, takes in a list as it's a parameter to the join, the call of the join. It will then take all the elements in that list, combine them together into one string, separating them by whatever you have here. That'll be the separator character. Okay, because it's such a dreary day and I'm not that exciting today, so why don't we do something in class? Why don't we try writing a program that does the following? So you could write a program that's going to have a main function. It's going to have a main and a second function. The main function should prompt the user to enter in their email address. So mine would be, my short one would be rosendv@shu.edu. And what I want you to do is then take that value and pass it to a function. That function will then extract out the domain name, the rosent.tv the shu.edu, and it will separate out the name of the person. And what I want you to do then is to print, okay, first try printing out print out in the function call as one value the name, the person's name, and then as the second value the domain, which in this case is shu.edu. And if you get that working, then instead of printing that out in the function that you called, print it out in main. So pass it back to main and have main printed out. So the behavior that I want is you're going to say, please enter your email address. You're going to type in your own. It's going to be separated by an @ and then it's going to say your name is RosenDTV and your domain is shu.edu. So why don't you guys try writing that? Okay. So I started doing this. So what we want to do is have a main function. I need to call main. Main is going to prompt the person for their email address. So we're going to get the email address, and then we're going to take that, and what we want to do is we want to have another function which is going to break it apart into the ID, the username, and the domain name. So I'm going to write a function called parse, and I'm going to pass it the address that was just entered. So this is the information that it's working on. Okay. So now what should I do? Anybody get it running? Brian?
So, I did. I put in like a new variable, and I called it like sep, because like for separation, and I put sep equals addr.split, and then in parentheses with the @ sign.
Okay, so Brian took ADDR, which has the full name, rosen at shu.edu, and he wants to split it apart, so he knows he can use the split method, but what is the value that's separating the domain name from the username? It's the @ sign, right? So he called the split method saying, okay, look for where the @ is, and then return to me, he called it a variable sep. It's as good as any. And so what is sep going to be after the split method runs? It's going to be a list. Everybody got that? Because split returns a list. And what's going to be the first element of the list? The username, and the second name is going to be the domain name, right? So he's almost done, right? So then he said print.
Your usernames.
And then what did you have here? It's a list. It's sep.
Bracket 0.
So he's getting the first element of sep because it's a list.
And then same thing for the domain name.
And he's simply going to take sep, and he's done. Now, in this particular case, parse didn't return anything. It just took the value, it took something to work on, and it did its thing calling split, and that's the end of it, right? Does everybody get it? So here you had to be a little clever to see that split seemed like it was going to do the job, but you had to figure out which character to tell it to look for in order to do the split. I was using sort of normal separator characters like space and tab and comma, but split doesn't care. It's going to look for that particular character, and it's going to take the whole string and return as many segments whenever it sees the split, wherever it sees the separator character. Got it? Now, if I wanted to, okay, this works perfectly fine. If I wanted to, what if instead of in parse, I wanted to print out the answers here? What would I have to do to my function here to get this to now work? Mario?
You have to pass sep.
Well, I'd have to say again. What do you want me to type? Why don't we do that?
You'd have to put sep in domain.
You would? And where would I put it?
In the parentheses next to me.
Here?
Yeah.
So remember, this indicates that I'm passing, if I have something next to the define here, it means when main gets called, I'm passing it something to work on. But main is the starting point. It's getting address, and it's doing the work, calling the thing to do the parsing, and then print it out. So I don't want to pass something to main. I want something to be passed back. I want parse to pass something back from main.
You just return sep?
So Jen said, why don't we just return SEP? Everybody get it? So we're going to, parse is going to get address to work on. It's going to create SEP, which is the splitting of the address, and it's going to return SEP. The only thing that's different here, but I'm glad you caught on, is that in the past we returned values. We only returned single value, we returned a number, we returned a word. And now, can we return a list? And the answer is yes. The list is simply a variable, and it can get returned. So that's perfectly reasonable. Okay, I'm still not done. So I'm returning SEP. Where's it going? Brian?
The return value for parse, so you just set a variable there. So
I could add SEP. It's the same one here. Hi.
Hi, I'm sorry to
No
bother you.
problem,
I'm just, I'm checking leaks.
You must have a big job.
Yeah, so they're all over the place, on the 5th floor too.
So it's abated. It's gotten a little better.
Okay.
And we got
That's
two
probably
of
because
them.
the rain, that's because the rain probably slowed down. I'm sorry to interrupt your class. All right. Thank you. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So everybody here, I want you guys to become more familiar with this idea that when we have a function that returns a value, we simply say return that variable name. This variable name doesn't have to be the same as that. I did it that way because I could then not have to retype SEP. So the function gets called. We pass to the function parse the value ADDR. The parse function does whatever it wants to do. When it's done, it decides that it's going to return a value back to wherever parse was called. And so I want to take the value that's returned and I want to put it in this variable SEP. This is the variable SEP in main. So maybe a better way, this could have been any variable. This could have been the variable answer. They don't have to be the same name. The only thing I'd have to do is be here consistent. But this returned a list, and now I'm taking that list ANS, which really is the same thing as the variable SEP from the function parse, and I'm going to take out its individual elements. So I understand the functions can be a bit confusing, passing it back and forth. If we hopefully we'll see it more and we'll get the idea. In this case, there was no real reason to pass it back, but I just wanted you guys to have some more experience seeing this, become more comfortable with it. I'll post all of these, of course. Okay, so the last idea here for today, check this out. I'm not a big fan of this, but I would be remiss if I didn't show you that this is a feature in Python. So I can say x is equal to 1 and y is equal to 2, and I can obviously say print Okay, so no big surprise here. I have a program that sets x equal to 1 in one statement and y equal to 2 in another statement. I'm simply printing it out, right, guys? Well, it turns out that Python actually allows me to assign variables in the same statement, simply separating them by commas. So instead of typing this, okay, I could have said x comma y is equal to 1 comma 2. So in one line, I can initialize, or I can put into variables multiple values. So here, since the first two, the x and the y, are on the left-hand side of the assignment statement, the equal sign, Python knows we're assigning it a value, and now it sees that these variables are separated by a comma, and it says, oh, he wants to initialize two variables. And so it looks to the right-hand side of the assignment statement, and it sees a 1, 2, and so it does a pairwise assignment saying x is equal to 1 and y is equal to 2. So if I run this, I get the exact same output. So this is a facility in Python. I could have, and I'm not limited to simply assigning an individual value. I could have had some expression here, 2 times 3, and 1 plus 2. So I could have expressions there in addition to just assigning a particular constant. Okay? I'm hoping at some point you guys might go out in the world and someone's going to give you some Python code to read, and you might see somebody use this facility. I just want you to see what it does. You could have just as easily, as I did in the beginning, have on 2 different lines assigning x to a value and y to a value. It's sort of a shorthand. Me, I don't like it, but I think I'm very big on trying to read code, trying to write code so when someone looks at it, they understand it. And I think this is more difficult to understand, but it does seem to be something that Python programmers like. What I don't know is, place your bets. So what if I were to do this? I were to assign x 1 plus 2 and then y x times 3. And what I don't know is that, will it now know that x has a value and not blow up? Good. Okay, so it blew up because it wasn't defined, because even though you might say, well, wait a minute, first you're going to assign x 3, and then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to assign y x plus times 3, and at that point x has a value, but it turns out that's funny. The compiler okay, so what happens when you type in a Python program, you should know this word, a compiler. Okay, so a compiler is a program. In some sense, it is one part of the Python program. We're learning how to program in Python. And what the compiler is that something that reads in our statements and looks at our statements and decides, is this a legal Python program? Does this conform to all the rules of typing in a Python program? The program that does that is called a compiler. And then what it does is if we do conform to all the Python rules, it takes our statements and then creates code that it actually turns our Python statements into things that the processor can execute. So there's really a 2-step. Look at the code and make sure that it is correct syntactically. I haven't violated any rules. And then if that's true, turn all those statements into something the computer can execute. And in this particular case, the compiler was not happy with us using a variable prior to it being defined. Okay, so you can use this if you like, and you could have had as many variables as you want here assigned. I'm not going to take points off if you use it. In solutions that I come up with, I won't use it. I don't think it's a good programming idea. The second thing I want to show you is the following, and I saw people try to do this on the exam. It's actually a good attempt at you guys on the exam. So on the exam, people were trying to return multiple values. So you might have written that program, the last program, the lottery program, and you're computing the number of wins and losses in some function, and you say, crap, I need to return this back to the main function in order for the main function to then print out the result, and you try to return multiple values. I saw people try to, so they had some function, so they had main, and then they had define main, and then they called some function, and in the function did something. Let's suppose it computed the lottery, and you needed to return the number of wins and the number of losses, and you said return wins, and then you said return losses. And this is wrong, but it's not a bad idea. I understand what you're trying to do. You're trying to return multiple values. And in general, Python doesn't allow you to return. This doesn't work because what actually happens is whenever Python sees the word returns, it stops. So it would probably return wins and ignore the second statement. So I see wins isn't defined, whatever. So how can you get around that problem? How can, if in fact you want to return two values, how can you get around that problem? That Python, in reality, only allows you to say, if once it hits a return statement, it's done. You can't have another return statement afterwards. You can solve that problem in two ways. One way we just saw. We saw that Python allows us to return a variable, but that variable could be a list. So if we wanted to return multiple values, what we can do is we could stuff into the list the multiple values, and then the list will come back, and then we can pull out of the list as many values as we want. So one way is with a list. Another way, okay, is that while you can't have two return statements in a row, okay, what you can have is on the same return statement separated by commas two variables. And in this particular case, if I would have had this would have been fine. So in a manner that we saw before where you're able to note, right, I can assign x to 1 and y to 2 by simply having commas separating the variables and commas separating the results. In a fashion similar to that, what I can do is, and this is the program we had before, that if in fact I have this main program and I'm prompting for an address, okay, and now notice this statement here. So notice that I have on the left-hand side of the call to parse email, I have name, comma, domain. I have actually two variables here. So parse is going to do its thing and then ultimately return two values. Let's look at parse. So parse first calls the split method, taking the looking for the @ sign, and 0 meaning, okay, so now XX is going to be equal to the username, and I run the exact same split method, but now I'm going to return the thing that comes after the @ sign, the domain name. I'm going to set that equal to YY. And note here that what is legal is now in my return statement, I can pass back as many values as I want as long as they're separated by commas. And then in the function that calls it, in the line that calls it, note that effectively name is going to be set equal to whatever XX is, and domain is going to be set equal to whatever YY is. So if you were to take, for those people try to return multiple values, I didn't teach yet, and you didn't, as you saw from my solution, you didn't have to do it that way. But if you did want to do it, then you simply can return multiple values by separating each of the individual things you want to return by a comma, and then where you're calling the function have as many variables separated by commas as things that you're returning. And that's a second way, besides using lists, that Python supports returning multiple values back from a function. Let me just, I'll type this in and show you. And so note here, this program just ran, the one that I had before, and so when parse email got called, address was rosendv@shu.edu. The split method ran and created a list. This creates a list, and by putting a bracket 0 bracket after it, I'm asking for the first element of the list. You might not have seen this before. Okay, this would have been equivalent to saying okay, and so now I have an XX, I have the username, and a YY, I have the domain name, and I can return both of them simply putting those on the same return statement separated by a comma. Any questions? Okay, I think that's enough for today. Thanks for showing up. Not fair weather patriots or not fair weather students here. So I've handed out a homework assignment. I think it's pretty small. Exercises, I think, Ord and Care and